Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Above Board podcast. I like to think of our show as sort of a mashup of financial expertise, self-improvement talk, a little bit of self-development, and then maybe even a little bit of entrepreneurship. The truth is, it's really just the things we want to talk about on our show. It's our journey through life, and sometimes I've learned this a long time ago is that we're actually all having very similar experiences. Maybe the environments are different, maybe the gravity of situations are better or are worse, but as my good friend the Rich B always says, relate but do not compare. Now, I've shared my story throughout past episodes on dealing with things like imposter syndrome or having stress that is negatively impacting my health or my mental wellness. All of these things are very relatable. This year, we even talked about focusing on gratitude. We had an episode with Raina Fitzgerald, episode 101, in fact, called Gain and Grounded. And for me, the word gain that I'm using this year, it kind of stemmed from the book The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Being gain minded is just another way of saying that the glass is half full. So my wife said to me the other week, we were having this conversation, and she said, you always share with people that, like, in your own mind or in your own narrative, that you're this very positive person. And I think externally, I kind of skew this way for a plethora of different reasons, but part of it's because I feel like I have to be that way for others. I have to show up for clients that way. I have to show up for people within my community to be very positive and glass half full. But she followed that statement up by then saying, "You haven't been very glass half full lately." I thought, damn. I mean, that was tough to hear. And fun little backstory. Earlier this year, I asked Jackie to really be proactive in calling me out, and I almost, in a way, I had to kind of give, not that I had to give her permission, but I think sometimes people can be very sensitive about things like that. So I gave her permission to say, like, listen, if you see me trending a certain way, you see, like, I'm trying to be this version of myself that is the best version it can be and productive and growing and all that good stuff. So call me out if you see something. And I realized after she said that I had been a victim of my own circumstances lately. And the truth is, I feel like, anyway, if we don't practice and exercise gratitude and then we're just left to our own thoughts and devices, we're going to kind of tend to skew negative. Like, I get that individually we maybe have varying degrees of optimism or pessimism. Like, one person you might look at and be like, that person's always so pessimistic. They're an Eeyore. They're always negative. But let's just say that we have our own internal thermostat. So, like, maybe yours is set more positive or optimistic than mine is, but that's your benchmark. And if you're not working on kind of staying at your benchmark or improving it, you may find yourself slipping into the gap mindset, maybe going a little bit negative. And man, I hate that. So my first question for you is, do you have someone in your life that can call you on it, that can call you on your BS? Have you given them permission to do this? And again, I had this conversation with Jackie specifically because I knew she might be a little gun shy to actually do it. And I wanted to say, like, please do it. Please help me. Or maybe you don't have that. Maybe you take extreme ownership and you have this, like, great presence of self-awareness and you can kind of see this in yourself. Either way, what are you going to do about it? So this conversation for me happened a couple of weeks ago, and I immediately went to work on trying to be productive and trying to, I guess, fix it, for lack of a better word, or maybe move into a more healthy space versus unhealthy, which kind of brings me to my next conversation. So another fun overshare. Yesterday, we had this Enneagram session, and I am an Enneagram type 3, which is known to be like an achiever. And we had an expert come out on the topic. Her name's, shout out to Tracy Weiss. She guided us through these conversations. And again, I'm a type 3, which is like kind of highly driven and achievement oriented. And so with that being said, I need to reach goals and milestones. Like, I have to have benchmarks that I can hit. And interesting about myself, I don't necessarily need to see the improvement as much as I need to see that I'm doing the things to work towards improving. Because if I'm able to do that and I'm checking those boxes daily, then I know that improvement's going to come later. And so, by the way, one final thought on this topic. Back to Tracy. She's a life consultant and she is an Enneagram expert. She is an absolute rock star. The first time she came to our office a year ago, when I first met her, it's like she pierced into my soul and, like, knew so much about me before she knew me, just based on how I answered this Enneagram survey that we had to do before we met her. So that's how good she is. Look her up on Instagram. She's an absolute rock star. Her Instagram is at Weiss Counsel, WEISS Counsel. So anyway, this is all great information. You learn this stuff about yourself. Someone gives you some self awareness and says, "Hey, maybe you're slipping. Maybe you're not as positive, or maybe you're being kind of glass half empty lately. What are you going to do about it?" So, how do we find ways to be more grateful in our life? Well, I don't really know. I'm not an expert. Frankly, I can just tell you what I'm doing on this learning journey about myself. The first thing I've done and have been trying to be proactive about, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I stopped looking at my phone. So I don't want to get into like the comparison trap anymore and like scrolling on Instagram Reels. And even though like maybe I'm consciously smart enough or aware enough to be able to like decipher like at best this person's life is being glamorized on social media, and at worst this isn't even real. This is all just like fake for social media. But why would I let that seep into my subconscious? Like, why would I let those thoughts, the keeping up with the Joneses and the comparison trap, get to me? So I don't want to put myself in that environment and condition. And so what I've also learned is by removing my phone, specifically on the week, on like weekends or after hours, like set my phone, keep it in my home office or keep it in the bedroom when I'm out with my family. It also means that I'm generally less available. And I've caught some heat for that from certain people, interestingly. So maybe I'm not answering a phone call or a text as promptly as I once did. And I'm also finding myself saying no to things more. And so, guess what happens when you do that? Some people, whether they say this directly or their actions kind of say this or what have you, but I've heard this from a couple of people like, "You've changed, you're different." And do you know who's not saying that to me, by the way? Someone that actually cares about me and is happy to see me grow. You know who someone is that is saying that is probably someone that's maybe a little bit more selfish with their intent, or maybe they don't care for like some personal things that I'm doing to grow because it kind of tends to put pressure on them introspectively thinking about what they're doing. I don't know. I don't pretend to know why, but I know that I have a good heart and I have good intentions, and I'm just trying to find better harmony and balance in my life. And I've learned about myself that being like 24/7 on call available to people was pulling me out of that space to be able to find gratitude and peace. So, not having my phone on me as much has helped me connect with being more present and ultimately being more grateful. But it's had these unintended struggles that I wasn't really initially prepared for. Like as I just mentioned, with some folks who have said some things to me about it. But I like to think of that as maybe people revealing themselves, and now I get to decide what to do with that relationship, and maybe that looks like creating a little bit more space and distance. So I'm spending less time on my phone. I'm trying to actively put it aside to be more present, and I'm also spending. This has been just a journey the last 2 weeks, doing every morning a 10-minute meditation and then doing like a 5-minute gratitude journal that I've talked about. I love this book. Shout out to David DeSell, who's actually been on our podcast before, who originally turned me on to this about 2 years ago. And what's really funny, I scroll through this book, like I flip through the pages, and you have to fill the date in at the top, the date that you're journaling. And it's a 5-minute journal. It's really easy. It's like 3 things that brought you gratitude today, 3 things that you could have done differently. And what's very been interesting for me is correlating whenever I've been actively using this journal relative to my increase in life satisfaction and gratitude in that phase of life versus when I'm not using it. So it's been really great. It's just been a good exercise of awareness of like, I need to be doing this. I need to be doing this every day, because when I do it, I tend to have these like great stretches in my life that could be weeks or months or this season of life where I'm like, I look back and I'm like, that was an awesome time in my life. What was something I was doing then that was positive? Oh, I was meditating and I was journaling. The last thing I'm trying to accomplish, and it's in line with maybe not being on my phone as much, is dedicating 30 minutes of active playtime with my kids. Now, I know to you listening to this, that doesn't sound like a lot. Like you're probably with your kids way more than way more than 30 minutes, as I'm sure you're thinking. And so am I, by the way. It's not just 30 minutes a day, but sometimes I'm not always as engaged with them as I want to be. So there's a reason that I strategically use the words active and play. It's because it's forcing me to do 2 things if I'm going to accomplish this goal each day. Number one, I'm being active, meaning I'm presently engaged with my kids, not partially, but presently and fully engaged with my kids. I'm not checking emails while we talk about their day or doing anything else that might communicate to them, because they're young, but they're very smart. They're very perceptive. I don't want to communicate to them a message that whatever else I'm doing or looking at on my phone is more important than what they're telling me in that moment. So that's what the word active means for me. It means being engaged, it means being present, and then play. So active play. The reason I'm using the word play is it forces me to do something more than just saying like, "Hey guys, let's watch a movie together." Or like, "Hey, let's go in the playroom and I'll play with you for 5 minutes, but then I get bored with it and then like I'm on my phone or something." Like I'm not just physically with them, but I'm doing some I'm playing with them. I like that because like, last night, for example, I was swimming with my daughter and we turned into this whole fun, like we were racing each other back and forth in the pool. And guess what? You start doing this active play. You might find that it ends up being more than 30 minutes. Like 30 minutes, the reason I said 30 minutes of active play was it was enough for me to kind of like break the cycle of being connected or engaged in thinking about something else or something about work that's stressing me out. It gives me like enough space to be like, all right, this is what I'm going to do right now. I'm doing nothing else. Like phone's going in the other room. I'm playing with my kids. It ends up being more than 30 minutes, but it's fun. And at the end of it, I'm grateful. Like it's eliciting the response that I want, which is finding gratitude and then finding a way back to being a little more glass half full. As I kind of started ending where I'm starting with this podcast is like where my wife called me on this and said like you haven't been as glass half full as you say you want to be. So I'm finding my way back to being this guy that can be a little more optimistic, a little more glass half full. And I want to do that for the listeners of this podcast, for my clients, for my friends, for my family, and ultimately for myself. But I've learned one thing, if I know one thing about myself that I learned yesterday in that Enneagram session that we did, is that as a type 3 achiever, I am either growing, learning, and evolving, or I'm going backwards. Like I joked with a friend of mine, actually David DeSell. I had a conversation with him today. I joked with him and I said, I feel like my engine is either in drive or reverse. There's no neutral, but I'm trying to find neutral at certain points in my life because I think that's maybe where gratitude lives for me. I don't know. I'm learning and I'm trying to figure it out. And as I've always said, this podcast is a documentation of our journey and progress in life. So I'm ready to sign off on this podcast, but I want to thank you for hanging with me today on the Above Board podcast. The next few weeks are going to be really fun on our show. We have Brian Ahern back to the podcast, as well as Patrick Surmeyer. And then we get Rich, Matt, and myself back together again, the original, the three co-hosts of the show, to welcome Sensei Juan Colon to our show. He is the owner of the local championship martial arts, and he's worked with all three of our children, we have more than three kids between the three of us, but he's worked with three of our kids. I take that back, 4 of our kids on the journey of discipline through martial arts, and it's really fun to see. So that's going to be a fun conversation. We will see you guys next week on the Above Board podcast. Until then, thanks for hanging with me today. See ya. Bye.